All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of AML Conversations. I am your host, Joe McNamara. I am the Director of Solutions Marketing here for AML RightSource. And we got him, guys. We got him. You know what they say, the hat trick, three's the charm. Joining me this morning is Mark Sully. He's our Managing Director of Commercial Affairs for EMEA and APAC. For those of you that have missed the first two episodes, highly encourage you, go back and take a look. Or certainly a listen, just because we've gotten a chance to cover a lot in terms of some of the outstanding challenges, as well as what we're seeing from an AI perspective in the fin crime space. I think last conversation we talked a little bit more about the challenges that are posed to our crypto friends, and today what I really wanted to pull the thread on, as you kind of alluded to at the end of our conversation, is the concept of sanctions and geopolitical risk. And so, before I do that, though, for those that have not gotten a chance to listen to those episodes, coming into this one is number one. Mark, why don't you just give us a quick overview of who you are, what you do, that kind of thing, and we'll get into some of these questions.
Yeah, hi Joe. So I'm Mark Sully. As Joe alluded, I look after our commercial relationships across Europe and APAC. And it's really useful because we've got our clients spread across sort of crypto payments as well as the traditional banks. And that gives us a really good insight and benchmark about what's happening, what people are doing across all different areas, especially with the big AI topic that we've mentioned and talked about before. And how are people evolving to try and mitigate risk while also driving effectiveness and efficiency. So great to be here, Joe.
Happy to have you back, Mark. So without further ado, let's jump into it, man. So, like I mentioned, sanctions screening is definitely one of the areas where we're seeing just these massive surges in volume. But I think if it were just that would be enough of a headline to talk about. But when you couple that with the fact that the regulatory bar just seems to keep moving up, my question right off the bat is, how are you seeing technology transition, play out in that kind of environment, and what is that looking like for our clients?
I think the volumes are significant, and they don't seem to change. I almost feel it's tough on the institutions that have to deal on a daily basis of things changing, and a vessel being one day fine, next day can't dock in a port, or a certain jurisdiction or dual use goods becoming a real challenge, and then mapping the different institutions like OFAC, HMT, EU, as well as then sort of the external list providers. There's a lot to be able to deal with. And trying to reduce the noise and really identify who is a sanctioned entity, who should I not be having any conversations or any correspondence with, or how do I manage that? So there's a lot going on in the space, and that puts pressure on technology. And the two areas, there's a lot of how do I deal with the false positives and the noise that come out and the A-listers, and how do I reduce that noise to really allow my analysts to investigate the sort of true hits. A lesser area is also the list management of what goes in, because they're all in different formats, different structures. And and I know there's a few organizations starting to look at how do I manage what goes into the funnel at the top, because if I can do a lot of work up front, it saves me a lot of noise coming out the back end. But it's a big area, volumes don't decrease, so there's a lot of work and technology and the use of AI to be trying to help reduce the noise and also simplify and increase the throughput without missing anything. And that's the key. You can't afford to make a mistake.
Especially given some of the specific anecdotes that you gave, right? Dual use goods being kind of front and center for me, kind of that proliferation financing element. But, along the same lines, right? And I love the concept that you said, if you can control what's coming in at the top, you get a better outflow at the bottom. It's unlikely that we're going to see volumes drop, anytime in the near future. And with that comes, the increase in number of alerts. So, for our clients, when they're looking at automated practices or just technology that can help them reduce these alerts, at one end of the process, you kind of mentioned what that looks like at the other end, but could you expand upon that just in terms of where they're either focusing or refocusing their investigative efforts, or certainly what does that look like for somebody that has in fact, taken this technology and applied it in a way that's beneficial to their overall program?
So I think if you look at the detection and trying to work out, what to process, that list management stuff coming in really helps reduce the amount of noise that gets created further downstream. At the end of them, whether you're using some of the Focussoft or a OWS or whichever different types of system you're using to be able to then, do your detection and output, there's a lot of players that are looking at how do they reduce the noise and auto close because it's a definite not a hit, and then go into the investigation piece. What we're also seeing now with a number of our clients is starting to look at, as I'm doing that investigation, how can I auto use or augment the investigation process with technology to help that workflow, reduce the amount of time that the analyst is taking, and to try and speed it up. And that's what I think there's different areas and different places where technology really comes into the process.
And kind of in the same vein, one of the things that I'm thinking about for the reality of these teams is, like, even when you're trying to implement new technology or you're trying to transition to some form of new infrastructure, I have to assume, it's not like time stops for you. Like, you still have to figure out a way to manage all of the transactions and the alerts and the things that are coming, on the day-to-day basis. For someone who's trying to satisfy a regulatory requirement while also trying to transition to this new infrastructure at the same time, like, where does something typically give out or is most likely to give out, right? Something's going to give.
Well, there's a challenge with budget. There's a challenge then with resource, and how do you best use your resource? And especially, that's where I think sometimes, depending on whether we're talking traditional banking, whether we're talking payments or crypto, there's a bit more flexibility in terms of utilizing external resources versus, in-house resources. And how do you have surge or capacity support, depending on the volatility that we see sometimes within the sanctions arena, that needs to be able to map to make sure you hit your deadlines, whilst also everyone needs to be moving to where you can't just keep throwing bodies at the situation. We need to be moved into a more augmented, technology-led state. So I think we're working with many clients that are looking at trying to drive that technology and efficiency gain. But in the meantime, they've got a surge support type model to be able to help pull on resource as and when needed, depending if they get spikes or hits, or as they transition from one system to another, to really make sure that they are mitigating all the risk, whilst trying to manage budgets as best as possible.
Is kind of that old saying, if you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Like, when I think about it through the lens of technology, it kind of gets back to our first conversation around that silver bullet of what the uninformed assumptions are of what AI can do. I love the point too around, if you can arm your specialists with the correct tools and the correct technology that allows them to wade through, this growing sea of challenge, or this growing sea of risk for your institution, regardless of where you stick it or where you're implementing this infrastructure, you should see those results. But I think it really is not a zero-sum game here, right? Like, it's never going to be, okay, well, we can replace this team completely with this tech. It really, I think if I'm looking around, and this is from my perspective, but you keep me honest, I see a lot of our clients looking at it through the best of both worlds. And essentially, how do we arm our best specialists, our highest and most comprehensive critical thinkers and investigators with these tech stacks that will just unlock their capability to be able to do more. And in the same way, do less of the repetitive kind of manual work process without losing much, if any, of the value that comes from those investigations, and clearly bringing those through to fruition wherever they may end up.
I think 100%. I think the role of the analyst will probably evolve, whether it's for sanctions or transaction monitoring or KYC as well. I think what you'll start to see over time is, how does the analyst work? If we've got better detection, we should be able to auto-close a lot of the noise, but actually we're going to probably find more and more potential risks. Or we're going to highlight who is a sanctioned entity, or who their alias is, and who's actually really behind some of those things that we find when we're investigating a case. What we really need then is the ability to utilize technology in the right way to augment and, like you said, get rid of the repetitive processes, get rid of the copy paste, and actually allow them to really look after try and find the bad actors, and how do we really mitigate the risk, and also help going through to law enforcement as to where to focus their time and efforts and find the real needles that we want rather than just the hay.
I couldn't say it any better, so I'm not going to try to. Mark, I think that's perfect in terms of, how folks should be looking at the growing risks associated to, geopolitical risk as well as sanctions. As always, I'll give you the final word. Any other thoughts around what institutions or players in this space should be thinking about as it relates to, these very pertinent challenges?
Only that as a whole, everything is still very siloed. I know we've all talked about how we bring it back together, but in terms of sanctions, in terms of screening, in terms of transaction monitoring and KYC, ultimately, who are our clients? How do they behave? What do they do? And how do we bring that all together? Good data, maintaining that data, and then helping technology augment the process should enable us to reduce cost, while also then mitigate risk and ultimately be able to help try and prosecute more people where we want to stop those predicate crimes like human trafficking, like terrorist financing. And in the world that we're in at the moment, it's really important. And that's where I think sometimes having an understanding of what you do and what we do within the financial services world becomes really important, as to we're trying to stop the money and flowing through the system, but that's money is typically got a lot of very bad things attributed to it from where that money's come from. And if we can stop that or help to reduce that, that's something that I think we all fight for daily.
So bad guys, we put you on notice. It's going to be harder and harder to hide. But in the meantime, Mark, really appreciate the insights, the time this morning. Guys, if you have not gotten a chance to check it out, I highly encourage you, go back, take a look at or listen to the first few episodes with Mark. Can't say enough from a grateful and just thankful perspective. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks.
Hopefully we'll talk to you soon.